ثانية ومساء الخير عليكم ضيوف الملتقى الكرام. وتستمر الجلسات والمناقشات الثقافية في صالون الملتقى الأدبي في معرض أبوظبي للكتاب بدورته 29. الجلسة الآن كتير مميزة، جلسة شبابية، جلسة حنستمع فيها لآراء الجيل دي حول الثقافة ومفهومة ومن وجهة نظرهم. اللي حاعمله مختلف عن اللي كنا بنعمله كل مرة بالملتقى، اللي هو منهم نفسهم حيكونوا، واحدة حتكون المودريتور والبقية حيكونوا الانترفيوز. دي فكرة مختلفة وجديدة، وحنتيح لهم المجال تماما إنه يديروا الحوار كما يرون مناسبا، وتكون الأسئلة منهم وإليهم وفيهم. بعد ما نخلص النقاش بنفتح الباب للأسئلة والأجوبة زي ما بنعمل كل مرة. بترك المجال للشيخة ماجدة على أساس تكون هي المودريتور، حتعرف بنفسها وكل واحد في الصبايا والشباب حيحرف بنفسه. أهلا وسهلا فيكم في الملتقى وشكرا. هم طلبوا هم طلبوا.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum. Hello everyone. My name is Maجدة. I'll be the moderator for this session, and this session will be in English. Before I begin, I'd like to thank الملتقى Literary Salon and السيدة أسما المطوع for having us here today. The topic today will be about third culture, but from the perspectives of the youth. The panel here today consists of youth that come from both the universities, New York University Abuظbي and also the American University of Sharjah. I'd like to go around and introduce myself, and the panelists will go along and introduce themselves as well. So yeah, my name is Maجدة. I'm currently a senior at New York University Abuظbي. I major in political science with a minor in social research and public policy. I just submitted my senior thesis yesterday, which was on the topic of Emirati youth and political participation. I will be going to graduate school this fall, where I will be doing a master's program in global governance and diplomacy.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. My name is Wa'mar العويس, and I'm an international studies student at the American University of Sharjah. I am also a published author of a poetry book called Salvaged.
Good afternoon. My name is Natacha Nazi. I'm a few weeks from graduating from the American University of Sharjah in International Relations with minors in Women's Studies and History. Since Maجدة explained her thesis, I also submitted my thesis last week, which was very similar to hers. It was about the women's participation in the political arena in Lebanon. So I think it's it has very much to do with my major. I was the Secretary General of Model United Nations at AUS, and I come from Lebanon originally, but I was raised here for most part. And yes, I'm very excited for this.
Hi, my name is لارايب أبرار.
Currently I am writing my undergraduate senior thesis on diaspora, particularly the South Asian diaspora. I look a lot at hybrid identities, and this is a research area that's actually very close to me because I was born in Pakistan, but I was raised abroad. I was raised in Canada and in Saudi Arabia, so this topic is actually something I'm really interested in, and is one of my research areas as well.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is ودانة الحوسني. I'm an NYUAD graduate, so from class of 2018, I studied social research and public policy, specifically environmental policies. And I'm very excited to be here today and talk about being a third culture kid from someone who is from the UAE but born and raised abroad as well.
So the third culture can mean different things to different people, but for the context of this panel, we're using this explanation. People of a third culture are raised in something which is different to their parents or different to the culture of the country named on their passport. Third culture kids or adults have had the opportunity to move between cultures or live in a culture other than their native culture before they reached an age in which they had the chance to fully develop their personal and cultural identity. I'd like to go ahead and ask our panelists to share their personal story of being a third culture kid or experiencing some type of third culture environment?
Hello again. So my experience as a third culture kid might be a bit different. So I was born and raised in the UAE, and possibly like the time that I spent outside of the country wasn't an entirely different environment. I lived for 4 years in Saudi Arabia, and then coming back to the UAE, I felt the biggest influence to my cultural upbringing was the type of schools I was enrolled in. So for most of my primary years, I actually went to a Catholic school in Sharjah. And then moving on, I've been in international schools up until my undergraduate years.
So my experience is, I could say, a typical third culture kid experience. I come originally, so I was born in Lebanon, and then at the age of 8, I would say, I moved here, and ever since I've been living here. I went to school here, university here, and I've been exposed to many cultures, as I also went to international schools and university. And so I am a mix between this culture I'm supposed to be and this culture I've been living in. So this is my experience in very easy terms as the third culture kid.
Yeah, similar to like Natasha's experience, like I mentioned, I was like born in Pakistan, but I really only lived there for up until I was like age 4. And then my parents and I immigrated to Toronto, Canada, which is where I spent like a good chunk of my childhood. And then we moved to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. There's a lot of moving within Saudi Arabia, but yeah, basically I graduated from high school there, and that too was an international school, and now I'm here. So yeah, I think like as a result, it was a lot of like mixing around of different cultures. And so I'm not really able to like pinpoint, you know, where I would be like, hey, this is where home is. And I think that's also a big part of, you know, being a third culture kid.
So I think I would second most of the panelists' experiences as well. My passport says I'm from the UAE, I'm from Abuظbي, but I was born in the Philippines, raised in a lot of different countries. One of the last countries that I've stayed at was Kenya. So claiming that I'm only from the UAE seems like I'm lying to people in front of me, and that's my experience overall as someone who maybe identifies as a third culture kid.
So cultures mean different things to different places and even varies according to the individual. So I'd like to ask all of you, what does culture mean to you on a personal level?
Personally, the way I see culture is basically the accumulation of all your beliefs, all your practices, your lifestyle, aspects pertaining to your soft culture, your higher culture, and I feel, as you said, it differs from person to person.
Yeah.
And personally, I find that nowadays a lot of us here actually we share the youth culture, the millennial culture, and I feel perhaps that's what unites most of us despite our varying backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
So culture as generally defined is the carrying on of traditions and customs. However, as we discussed this or as we prepared for this, we realized that culture is much more. It's more of who you personally are and how you carry out this culture. So carrying these traditions and customs with how you lived and how you understand them and really how you carry them out, this is how I see culture personally.
Do you think what culture meant before and what it means now has changed over time?
So definitely adding on to what Omar said, this youth culture, or this new youth culture we're living in is much different because we can see clearly the traditions and customs shifting to a new, so with a new shift. So yes, I do believe it's changing.
Yeah, I think like for me, you know, it's really difficult to sort of define culture because I guess when you learn about it in school, you're always learning about it in terms of like very like markers like your nationality or language or food, ritual, music. And those markers seem really superficial and surface level at some level because, as we know, culture runs a lot deeper. And, you know, when you think about things like cultures like clashing with one another, you know, it's not going to be like my food versus your food, right? So I think culture has more to do with stories and has more to do with like the stories we tell about ourselves, about one another, and about our relationship to the world. You know, which is why I think when cultures clash with one another, it's like, it's not just this versus that, it's like my story and the validity of that versus like another person's story. Which is also why I think it gets really complicated and really complex when you're thinking about culture.
Do you think that the definition of culture has come to be more inclusive of other things such as gender norms, social norms, mental health even?
I think it's like kind of getting there, you know? I think slowly people are coming to realize that you can be inclusive while also being unique with culture, but at the same time there are like a lot of constraints and, you know, especially with like certain like customs that people feel like they're gonna keep invoking as justifications for like excluding others.
Okay. Yeah.
I think with the conversation that all three of you brought in, it's also important to notice that culture is not a constant thing. It's an ever-changing concept that happens. And as much as it is a communal understanding of what culture is, you can shape it as an individual. And I think it's, at least what I believe is that the culture I will pass down to my children is completely different from the culture that my parents passed down to me. So it is a very ever-changing concept, despite what we are taught in schools maybe.
Yeah. So given that 2019 is the UAE Year of Tolerance, we are reminded here in the UAE to be tolerant of differences, tolerant of one another's cultures. So in what ways do you think the UAE promotes tolerance and intercultural understandings? And maybe if you have any examples that you've experienced or seen.
I think the biggest aspect of tolerance in the UAE comes from the mindset that the way we're all interacting with each other, or rather supposed to interact with one another, isn't one with an us versus them kind of perspective, but rather where we treat each other as parts of ourselves. Thinking about tolerance growing up, so as I said earlier, I went to a Catholic school. There were students of different religious and cultural backgrounds there. So I very vividly recall Christmas was being celebrated, and then Isra al-Mi'raj was also celebrated, and then other religious events of students who come from different religions were also celebrated. Moving on to the international school I went to, it was actually an Australian international school. For many of us students, we weren't really exposed to other types of Australian events. So imagine Emirati students and students of other countries celebrating Australia Day or having Vegemite for breakfast. And I think many people here don't know what Vegemite is.
So my experience with this, I could bring in my personal experience. So I learned about the core of my faith in the UAE, and through these Sunday schools, which we called them, they were on Fridays though.
Yeah.
So Sunday schools where I learned about my faith and I grew with my faith in the UAE, and I can clearly remember examples of me celebrating Christmas or Easter or whatever holidays they were, very openly and very happily. So I could definitely recall some personal experiences. And this year, for example, with the Year of Tolerance, I went with my family to see the Pope, and it was a very nice experience for me. So, and that also, if we go back to the third culture, brings in a lot of third culture, to a lot of understanding of the third culture, because it's not just, okay, the Lebanese culture and the Emirati culture. It's more of I'm experiencing all these different cultures in the UAE, and that's to me what makes it different.
Yeah. Do you feel that living in the UAE and being of Christian faith, do you feel like you are not able to practice some things, or do you feel that the UAE was provided an environment where you were able to practice your faith?
So I think it's the opposite. I think I have more faith than a lot of the people where I go back home and meet. I think it's because there's this created community here of my personal faith, let's say the Catholic faith. There's a created community that's very, so we adapt really well. It's very open. You can do whatever you want within your community. So I think it was not a problem at all. Yeah.
Okay. So in today's world, in an age of rapid globalization, a difficult question that third culture kids don't like to hear is, where are you from? So I'll start with Dana.
Yeah, I definitely find this question very difficult sometimes, but I slowly adapted myself into answering, I'm from Abuظbي, and that's it. It's an easy, quick answer. I look the part. No one's going to question. I don't carry Filipino traits in me, or Kenyan or Indian, so it is an easy answer to give. What I noticed is it is very difficult to answer the question if you want to be true to yourself, because it's the culture that I relate to is a combination of things that I picked up with different cultures or different places that I've lived in. I don't want to bore you with a long, exhausting list of all the countries that I've lived in, thankfully. But it's just very important to notice that saying I'm from the UAE doesn't minimize my experience from other places. So when people ask me this question, I usually go the easy way out, or give a long list of all the places that I've lived in. But I think most of the people, when they ask, where are you from, they want to use a point of connection. They want you to say a specific place, and they want to connect with you and have a conversation about, oh, I've been to Italy too, or I like pasta, or very stereotypical things. But when I give a long list of places that I've lived in or where I call home, people lose interest in a conversation. Yeah, it's a difficult question to answer, but it's also important to recognize that a lot of people have that difficulty now because it's becoming a globalized world where we are adapting to different cultures. We are adapting to different identities and ideas and thoughts. So if people ask me where I'm from, my passport says I'm from Abuظbي, but I was born in the Philippines, lived in the Philippines for 4 years, and then moved to lots of different places. Most of my childhood was in Amman, Jordan. I've stayed in Kenya for maybe 6 years, and in India as well. And that's where most of my memorable childhood is. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would have to second Dana's sort of, being different, identifying differently from how you physically present, because, I mean, if I had to give a straight up kind of answer, I would say, oh, I'm from Toronto, Canada. But I mean, it's not always as easy as saying that because, I get a lot of follow-up questions after answering that. Things like, okay, but where are you really from? Which is always the worst thing to say. But then it's also things like, oh, but are you also from somewhere else? Or where are your parents from? Which, I mean, sure, is fair, because I guess when people imagine Canada, it's a country that's often coded as white, and so I have very obvious looking South Asian traits, and so you wouldn't necessarily put the two together. But so then I often just end up giving the hybridized answer. I'm okay, I'm Pakistani Canadian, and I guess that helps other people feel like I'm being more authentic. But yeah, I think it's definitely a little bit of a struggle to kind of, deal with how you're you look outwardly a certain way, but then internally your experiences have shaped you to see the world in a different way.
So again, my straight up answer would be Lebanon, but I couldn't be so personally if I look at me and what identify with and look at a person who has never lived abroad or has never experienced life out of Lebanon, I see humongous differences. So I do say Lebanon, but then I can't deny the fact that I've lived in Lebanon when I wasn't really aware of what was going on, so I was a kid. So yeah, I do agree with both of my previous ones.
So our panelist Asma العبار just joined us. A little bit about Asma. She's also a student from New York University, Abuظbي. She majors in film and new media. She's an entrepreneur. She is the founder of Pause, online business for baked goods, and also a co-founder of both Motivation Lab and Concept 10, which both work to support the youth reach their potentials. So Asma, right before you came in, we were just discussing the question, where are you from? So I'd like to ask you that question. How would you answer that?
Sure. Thank you, Maajda. I'd like to firstly apologize for being late. There was a little bit of traffic on the way. And to answer your question, where am I from? My straight answer would be from Dubai, the United Arab Emirates. But my genetic makeup would say differently. Both my grandmothers were child brides from India. Of course, given the time that they came to the UAE in, that part of them was shamed and they kind of had to ignore that part. And so I grew up not connected to that part of me at all. I've never been to India. I don't know how to speak the language. But genetically, I am 50-50. And it is really sad how my parents had to grow up to be ashamed of half of where they came from just because they were from another place just as the other. But it's nice to see that we're at a time where you can happily say that you're a hybrid or from a mix of places. And so yeah, genetically I'd say I'm 50-50, but where I identify myself to be from would be Dubai.
Okay. So on a personal note, I was born in Dubai, raised Dubai, and I'm from Dubai. But I'd like to ask you guys the question, do you believe someone has to leave their country to identify as a third culture kid?
Personally, I believe in today's world, cultures from East and West, they permeate into our lives, whether through word of mouth or even today with technology and globalization and even social media. Taking this answer a bit personally, so I believe looking at myself and looking at other people that shared similar experiences to myself, I feel a lot of us would actually identify as third culture kids without even leaving the country for much long. And I believe that is possible through, as I mentioned, aspects such as international schools or schools based on certain ethnic or religious aspects where a lot of people would be united despite many differences. And as I'd like to add, I was having a discussion with one of my psychology professors earlier on about 2 years ago, and where that professor said that our generation is possibly the most self-aware generation, and that makes us a bit different than the ones that preceded us. And I feel looking at taking this and sharing it within ourselves, I feel that within its own merit makes our generation possessing its own culture.
So I definitely agree with Omar because, for example, seeing Omar on a personal level in university or other students who have never left the UAE yet identify with many different cultures through the way they carry themselves, I would say that definitely yes, you can identify with different cultures or be aware of the third culture without leaving the country or without having lived outside the country for long, whichever country that may be. Yeah.
I don't think you necessarily have to leave your country to identify as third culture. I mean, I know that the official like definition is someone who's like lived outside of their country of origin, but I guess even country of origin can get quite messy if you're biracial or if you have multiple nationalities. And I think to some degree the term third culture is used to categorize people who don't necessarily fit a certain cultural mold. And so, I mean, I think there are lots of people in a given society who don't necessarily fit a cultural mold. And in this case, I'm thinking of women or individuals who are gender nonconforming or lower class members. I think those people don't necessarily get much of a say in how to shape culture, or their political participation is often curved in lots of areas, like worldwide, and yet they still exist within these like very dominant frames, and that experience is very much third culture as being separated from your country of origin or your place of origin, because in this sense, your place of origin was never really aligned with you to begin with.
I agree with all three panelists' comments about you don't necessarily have to live abroad to have this cross-cultural ideas. Sometimes in some cases, let's say your mom is from a different culture, your father's from a different culture, then you are adapting and creating your own based on these two. Or you're living in such a unique place such as the UAE where the dominant culture is not necessarily the local culture. So you are, during your developmental life, at the age of maybe 8, 9, up to your teenage life, you are aware or have the access of different cultures where you can create and shape your own. So you don't necessarily have to step outside of your region. We are a generation that has a vast amount of information through the internet or access. So creating your own identity or your own culture through that is very possible.
I'd agree with everything you guys just mentioned, and to add on what you said, Dana, the youth growing up today have so much exposure to different kinds of cultures, be it through media, be it through their nannies at home, their teachers from various nationalities, and their classmates who come from all over the world. And so that would definitely have an impact on how they see the world and the lens they see it from.
Yeah. So Dana, you mentioned that even in the UAE, we are a minority here. So I'd like to ask everyone, are cultures under threat in your home country? Do you think your culture is under threat, considering this age of globalization?
I think this is a sort of perspective that many would have. My perspective is a bit different, and as Dana mentioned earlier, that culture is ever changing, and it changes from time to time. And the way I see it is that culture, because the idea that culture does change, it doesn't necessarily make it under threat. And personally, as an idealist, I see the world as just us, and not us versus them. And that, for me, that us includes people of different ethnicities, or mentalities, or nationalities.
So I think, just to put everything into perspective, we could think of, so people generally think of cultures as pure cultures. However, I was in an anthropology class earlier this month where it was very clearly explained that there is no such thing as a pure culture. Cultures were molded from eternity to become the way they are today. So if you look at, for example, the Canadian culture 300 years ago, it does not look like the way it looks like today, or the Emirati culture 300 years ago does not look like the way it looks like today, or did not really exist in the form that we see it today. So I think this threat is something that we want to think about. However, it does not really exist because of this ever-changing culture we're living in, as Dana talked about earlier. So this ever-change creates these new cultures within the broader experience of the culture we want to preserve. however, no pure culture that's under threat.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm always really skeptical when people think of culture as something that's fixed, because it does change with changing behavior and attitude. Which is often why it's like strange to me when culture is used as a justification for excluding people or for like policing women's bodies. And then, you know, when like the younger generation comes and says, hey, we're actually going to try to be a lot more inclusive, people are like, oh no, our cultures are under threat. And I think even that phrase, like even to say our culture is under threat is a little bit, isn't to say, oh, our cultures aren't pure enough, or they're like being, you know, there's too much modernity or anything. It's more like there's too much mixing, or there's too much inclusivity, which, you know, is a little outdated, I think.
Yeah.
I simply answer this question with, if we're defining culture as a constant thing, then yes, our culture is under threat. If culture is something that is evolving and changing through generations, then no, it's not under threat at all.
Absolutely, and building on what you said, لارايب, it's usually someone who would say that our culture is under threat in a certain context would have a certain agenda to exclude certain minorities and certain groups. And I wouldn't say that our culture is under threat as much as that we have the opportunity today to learn from different cultures and to connect on a human level. And we're becoming humans beyond borders thanks to technology, and we're learning from people who we may have never met before. And so I would see it as an opportunity rather than a threat, and to really recognize that is where the shift happens. And so I think we should celebrate that opportunity rather than be defensive and try to put firmer borders around ourselves.
To add on to what you said, Asma, the way I see it, people that perhaps are threatened by culture changing aren't necessarily, do not necessarily feel that threat due to the fact that they want to exclude others, but rather perhaps out of fear or comfort.
You're right, Amar, because I think it would also be our responsibility as youth to, if we're looking to make a change and to include other cultures, we need to be mindful of other generations, other value sets, and in order for us to have an effective change or to be able to include different cultures within our experience, we need to be mindful of the audience and how to communicate a message like that. So you're absolutely right. It doesn't have to be ill-intended, even though it might seem like it from a defensive 21-year-old's aspect.
I'd like to ask you guys, when was a time you experienced a culture shock or re-entry culture shock, and if you guys have ever experienced this in your home country?
Well, I think it's interesting how you say like re-entry culture shock, because I don't think I've ever experienced like directly culture shock. I mean, I was really young when I like moved abroad, so I don't think I can generally remember those like experiences too well. But I will say though, thinking about like re-entry culture shock, I think if I were to go back to Pakistan, it might be a little bit of a culture shock for me, because I mean, my parents immigrated when I was 4, and I haven't really gone back since. And I think if I were to go back, it might be a little bit of a surreal experience for me, because even aside from not being able to speak Urdu very well, you know, I would physically look the part, but I internally don't think I would belong. I think when you're living as an expat or an international student, and while you're like respecting the laws and customs and norms of the country, you're not fully immersed into it. So like I'm living in the UAE, but I'm not expected to be Emirati because I'm not Emirati. But if I were to go and like live in a place like Pakistan, I think I would have to be a lot more Pakistani than I already am, if that makes sense. And I think that would be a little bit of a struggle, or at least that is so in my perception right now. And I think in some way that goes back a little bit to how we maybe like define culture, or what we might think of as the like location of culture. Because, I mean, my parents do practice Pakistani culture in our household, right? In terms of like the food we eat or the like way we dress on like special occasions. And yet there is still that like disconnect and that like fragmented removal from like the origin that causes like a little bit of the like fragmentation, yeah, of that experience.
So I would say I have experienced, and I experience almost every year, this re-entry cultural shock, because I generally go back to vacation in Lebanon at least once or twice a year. So in summer I spend some more time there, so around a month or so. And in the beginning I like to think of myself as protected from the way some people, or the way the country is made up, where it's really fragmented into parts where you identify as this if you're here, and then you identify as that if you're living there, based on historical, obviously, challenges in the country. So there's a huge culture of us versus them, and then I think I'm protected from that. But when I go back and get into this bubble of the us versus them, I find myself thinking in those terms sometimes. So I catch myself off guard thinking in those terms. I always go back to thinking, no, I don't really believe these things, but so I definitely experience it and live it. So it's very interesting to think of, because so I'm going back to the culture where I'm expected to fit in, or so I only learned the Lebanese culture through my parents and through television, basically, but I'm expected to understand everything that's going on and live it. However, it's really different for me, and especially when you're living in the country, when it's not a refined picture of the culture, the one you see on TV or the one your parents want you to understand, it's very different to live through that culture.
I think it's very interesting what you just shared, because Dana and I were at a Leadership Catalyst program yesterday, and they referenced the TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story. I don't know if you guys have watched it. If you haven't, I highly recommend you watch it. And what it talks about is the danger of certain stereotypes on how African women should be, on how Arab women should be, on how Muslims are supposed to be. And the fact that most of us have experienced culture shock or re-entry shock in one way or another, be it from Dubai to Abu Dhabi to Dubai, or from an international school to an all-Emirati school, speaks so much to the fact that within every culture, there is so much complexity and depth within each individual. And I think it just really says a lot about that, and how within, as I said, every culture within it, there is so much.
All right, I hope you're all ready for a story time. I've experienced cultural shock at the age of 15 when I came to the UAE. It's so interesting because I've moved to a lot of different countries and it was easy for me to adapt in these countries. But coming to a country where I always represented the UAE, but not knowing what to live in the UAE looks like, was very difficult. I came to the UAE at the age of 15. I went to all girls, Emirati girls school, which was very difficult to enter. I didn't know what a dukkan meant, or chips aman, or it was not part of the culture that I grew up with. So it was very hard for me to enter and try to be this image of what an Emirati means.
So all of us here on this panel are youth. Some say the youth have a responsibility to preserve culture. Some say we are the ones that change it. So I wanted to ask you, what is the role of youth in influencing culture?
To start off, I feel the youth, with regards to their position, are in actually a very good advantage, because they look at how their predecessors have lived their lives, and then they're living their own lives. So they have that vantage point where they can see, okay, this is a good aspect and we should continue with that. And then perhaps they can see, okay, this aspect of our culture or our lifestyles have been stigmatized, and we see no apparent reason for that. So maybe that's something for us to change. And one thing I find very relevant to this particular aspect is how the youth today are going against the stigma of mental health advocacy. And if you notice, a lot of the mental health campaigns going on currently, a lot of them are youth-led, and I feel that speaks volumes as to how members of the youth are carriers to changing cultural norms between yesterday and tomorrow.
So agreeing with everything Alma said and bringing in another aspect of it, I'm a women's studies minor, so I feel like I have to bring this in. So breaking some gender norms or fighting for gender equality in different aspects of life is something we see more predominantly in the youth culture. Not saying that our predecessors did not fight for this. That would be totally wrong. They did, but we see this more with the youth culture and changing more with the youth culture, or the youth accepting these gender equality ideas more. So yes, this is one aspect I see it from.
So a professor of mine says the youth today live in a time of remixes. And I think that's pretty interesting because if you think about a remix, it's fragmented. It's taken something that we would consider original and broken it up. It's added new elements, often from various places, resulting in an overall change in the composition of the song. So by adding hybridity, taking information from various places, gathering information and awareness using multiple media is a way that young people can influence culture. And I want to go back to my definition of third culture and its refusal to sort of fit the mold, and point out that there are lots of young people that are sort of challenging the status quo and, asking and questioning tradition, like, why does it have to be this way? And who says it always has to be? Does it matter if it's always been this way? And I think these questions and being able to critically think about, certain traditions is a way that I think the youth can influence and allow, for culture to be a little bit more progressive.
Alma, Natasha, and لارايب said it beautifully. I don't think I can add anything extra other than if we look at the population, the largest population that we have is the youth, so there is no question that the youth have a lot of say, a lot of power, especially in a country where there is a minister of youth, there is importance with listening to the youth, and there are so many examples of mental health and women empowerment and accepting different cultures and maybe even climate change that is very much driven by the youth.
The conversation you had, thank you, Dana. The conversation you had with your professor, Umar, really resonated with me when he said that this generation is very self-aware. And with that self-awareness comes the responsibility to celebrate the existing factors that make our culture beautiful. And to mention an example about the Emirati culture, hospitality, generosity, al-karam, al-diyafa, that are a part of the Emirati culture. It's the responsibility of the youth to ensure, they should ensure including others in this and celebrating these factors, as well as moving forward and towards changing different factors like speaking up against mental health stigma or women and gender issues. And so, yes, definitely, youth have a huge role to play, both in moving forward and holding on to the beautiful parts of our culture and traditions.
So I'll be asking our closing question, and then right after that, I think we'll have a few minutes left for maybe a couple of questions from the audience. So our closing question, what are you all most grateful for in all your experiences with having built a connection with more than one culture?
I think the biggest thing I'm grateful for is that all of us here, when we define ourselves, whether in terms of beliefs or culture or ethnicity even, it's multidimensional, and the idea of identifying with more than one dimension is very powerful within itself.
So I personally jokingly say I could never be with someone who has never lived outside of Lebanon, because to me that's just defines them as a person. So I see myself connecting more to people who were raised here than to people who were just raised in Lebanon their entire lives, because there are these different dimensions that that you cherish, or that these different dimensions you understand that others don't, because you've experienced different cultures. So I just find myself very grateful for this experience that my parents gave me, to be able to connect and understand and respect other cultures the way I do.
Yeah, I think similarly, you know, just having that like additional like perspective and added like empathy that, you know, people are going to be different, and just having that greater appreciation for multiplicity, you know, as difficult as it can get. I'm happy that I'm not able to identify as just one thing, because yeah, it just gives you a lot of flexibility.
I do agree. I think the most important thing, at least where I see it, is like being empathetic, having empathy and compassion when dealing with differences. And specifically when it comes to knowing different cultures, you are expanding. There's no question that when we meet someone from any sort of differences, we want to put them in a box that is very stereotypical, just so we can have a conversation with them. But I'm very grateful for the experience that I have, knowing that now I will put them in that box unconsciously, but then also recognizing that I am putting them in the box, and then I can expand that box based on my personal experience with that person.
Absolutely. The two things that I would say I'm most grateful for is that, one, it's a very humbling experience, because you realize how tiny you are in this huge world of so many different people with so many different experiences and backgrounds. And the second would be how exciting it is, because with every person you meet, as Dana said, it's an opportunity to learn from our differences, and second, to connect on that human level. And what an amazing time to be alive.
Thank you guys so much.
It's fascinating. I think it's really fascinating to listen to you. And we have a few minutes left for questions and answers. عندي أسئلة بس ما عايز عشان أنا محتكرة المايك يعني أتخذ take advantage of it. But many points that you mentioned is really triggering a lot of questions for me. It's with the richness of each society in terms of culture, and how many layers that we have in each of them, apart from being intercultural between different societies. Your story is amazing, it's fascinating, yours as well. I mean, there is a lot of questions that I can start with, but I will give the floor to the guests and the members of the الملتقى, and I really hope that we will be able to meet with you again to have another maybe closed door discussion and about the language. Sure. One, two, we have two questions so far.
Aida from الملتقى. There is a question always puzzled me. Why in our country, when we say they are third generation, they should speak English, and they refuse, or they are very poor in their Arabic language, while a third culture people in any other place, they keep their language. Why do you think your generation, the language, the Arabic language, or even the Pakistani language, the Indian, even all these people that they call us third world people, we are ashamed. I don't want to say ashamed, it's not the word. We don't speak our language because we consider ourselves the third cultural generation.
Does anyone want to?
Who wants to answer, please?
If I can answer this. برد عليك بالعربي.
برافو.
اللغة اللي الشخص بيتكلم فيها أكثر الوقت بتكون اللغة اللي هو متعود عليها أكثر شيء. يعني أغلب الناس اللي هم مثلا عايشين في دول أخرى أو مثلا مدرسين في مدارس معينة، ما يعني شيء طبيعي إن ما بيدرسون باللغة اللي هم متربين عليها، لأن في النهاية هالمدارس الأماكن تبغي تخدم كل حد مش فئة معينة. وفي النهاية إذا مثلا شخص ما بيتكلم لغة الأم بأحسن طريقة، هو مش شرط يكون تقصير منه هو، بس يكون هو متعود على شيء ثاني. وأكيد يعني نحن كلنا نفتخر بلغتنا الأم ونسعى أن نتكلم فيها بأحسن طريقة. وشكرا على السؤال.
برافو، شكرا. Now we'll take a question from the CNN. We have John the Tifterius with us.
Thanks. I have two daughters that are 14 and 16 years old, so I'd love to hear from the third culture about problem solving. So I was at a dinner with an NYU professor here, and then he asked his daughter, what's the biggest challenge of the future? She says, I don't see a biggest challenge. We have to wait for the baby boomers to get out of the way, because you're the generation that'll tackle climate change and inequality and the ability to adopt to automation, which we're going to talk about in the next session. Is that how you feel here, that my generation, which is the baby boomers, or you're the same thing for you, Asma, right? That we're not doing enough to tackle the challenges. We're almost spoiled by the fact we didn't face war at the calamity of World War II, for example. We have savings, we've made money, we've been protected, and your generation is ready to tackle these more difficult challenges in the future or not? I don't know how you want to handle it, but please jump in. And I don't have translation, so if you could stick to English on this one. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd say that the baby bloomer generation had a lot to offer. And just like Natasha mentioned earlier, that it wouldn't be true if we said that certain issues like global warming and gender issues weren't tackled in the generations before us, because they were. And so we are continuing the conversation, and if anything, we're being passed the torch, if I can use the NYU sign. And so I would say that we're very much moving in the right direction, hand in hand with the development that the development that has taken place from the generations before us.
Thank you, Jamila.
Thank you very much, Jamila from الملتقى. Everything was well said, and you really expressed yourself in a very well-defined manner to all the aspects were discussed. We are required to benchmark with other countries. We are not the only country which is a minority in their culture as ethnic group. Singapore is like this. And Lee Kuan Yew, the ex-president of Singapore, addressed this issue, that because in Singapore they were like 200 ethnic groups living in the same place, and he had his own development plans for future that time, for that we can learn from Singapore. But when we were discussing things together, I found that there's like overlapping between cultures and values, human values, cultures, and values sometimes. For that, I think we have to make clear cuts. There are human values, and there are cultures, and there are positive cultures and negative cultures. We don't want to maintain the negative ones, definitely. For that, I think, as you said, it's your responsibility to define the positive culture, tangible and non-tangible, one, as a heritage or so, then maintain it as youth, because you're now our future. You will proceed to the future with this culture. For that, you will be the real example to maintain these cultures. I wish you the best. Thank you.
I'd like to reply to you, if that's all right. So you were saying you would like it to be a clear-cut distinction between human values and culture. I would like to disagree in that I also think human values can be a part of culture. For example, I wouldn't define, my Emirati identity as my, speaking Arabic, being a Muslim, my Abba, my Shela. I also think, I think Asma, you touched upon this when you were saying generosity and hospitality is also part of, the Emirati cultures. Sorry? Exactly.
Yeah.
So I also think that, human values are a part of culture and they don't necessarily have to be two distinct things.
Thank you so much. We'll take only two more questions because we are running out of time and our distinguished guests for the next session are here. So can I start with the lady and then I come to you, sir? Thank you.
Hi, thank you for a great panel. Everyone was very candid and honest. It was very interesting. I'm assuming everyone here is between 20 and 25. I'm in my mid-30s, so probably somewhere a generation between yourselves and your parents. And I think the internet had a huge factor in propelling and putting this third culture thing on steroids, pretty much. But I was at the cusp of that because it happened in my youth, but you were born into that generation. So what I'd like to know is, and I have young children as well, so it'll be interesting to hear from your perspective, maybe just a one-liner on each. How did your parents define your culture and your cultural attachment to you? And is that how you're going to also sort of propel and portray that to your kids? Or are there factors where you're like, actually, I'm going to do or give my kids more of an attachment. My parents maybe didn't give me enough of the language, or I'm going to change things and tell them, actually, don't ever, think this way, or I want you to see the world in another way. So do you think there was an alignment between your generation and the generation of your parents on that or not?
Would you like to answer that, Amar?
To answer your question, personally, I've had the privilege of having parents that have an open mind and are aware of the differences between our generations and about how they, how I learned about my culture from them is that they led by example for me.
So I had mentioned earlier that I was expected to learn my culture through my parents and TV, and that's it, because we didn't have many friends who were Lebanese. But I think that was, so I stayed connected because we would visit every year. And so I personally had so I connected with the political aspect of my country, and that's where I studied that's what I wrote for my senior thesis, and that's my way of connection with it. So maybe for your children or for anyone, there should be a clear line of connection that connects you directly to the culture plus everything else around. That's how it worked for me. But so, yeah, I think it also depends on if I want to raise my children that way. I think I definitely want to keep the Arabic language, for example, because I deem that as important, or other important aspects, but not, for example, gender inequality aspects which are present in my culture. So I would pick out the things I love and then leave out the things I don't deem as important.
If I can speak from my experience with my mother, who, God bless her soul, she wanted to be here, but she couldn't be. I learned from her that parenting it's a two-way conversation, and it's a learning experience that goes both ways. And so our relationship when I was at 14 and 15 is very different than the relationship we have today. And there are some key moments that I remember with her, like the resources when I was a kid are going to be very different than the resources that are going to be available when I'm a parent. For example, the kinds of schools that are available. And so I remember when I graduated from school, and I said to my mom that when I have kids one day, I will definitely put them in the same school that you put us in, because it was amazing. And I remember her saying, "Mama, I tried my best to find the best school for you, and I want you to do the same for your kids when the day comes." And so she taught me to not just blindly repeat what she did, but to try to find the best in that time. And another moment that really stuck with me is a trigger word for me, and a lot of my peers would be aib, or what are people gonna say, and it's the whole reputation kind of thing, and we're kind of really against that because it's about who you're supposed to be and right and wrong and not reputation. And I found my mom sitting me down one day and she said, "Mama, forget about reputation. What is your brand? What is the kind of brand you want to have?" So she spoke to me in business terms. She was giving me the exact same message, but she remixed that to say, what kind of brand do you want to have? How do you want to present yourself? Whether it's in the way you speak, how you treat people, how you dress. And so I'd say 20 years of being a parent gave her that experience, but being at 21 now, I see these little things that she used to say to me when I was 16 and 17, and I realized, wow, there was a lot of thought behind that, Mom. And so I wish you all the best in the amazing journey of being a parent with your kids, and inshallah one day when your daughter's on a panel speaking, she can say that her mom is her best friend, like I can say that about my mom.
Okay.
بس ناخذ هنا وانت كالعاده بتختمي. سوري اسمع احسن شيء للاخر بس for the last.
السلام عليكم، مساكم الله بالخير جميعا. شرفني وسعدني الحضور في هذا الملتقى وفي دولة الإمارات وبالذات في أبوظبي، فهي بلدي ليس الثاني بل الأول يعتبر. عبد الوهاب الحربي من منسوب جناح المملكة العربية السعودية. أنا مع الأخ الأستاذ لما تكلم الأستاذ عمر بالنسبة لموضوع الهوية، فقدان الهوية أصبح الآن مع الأسف كثير يعاني فيه كثير من الناس وخاصة المبتعثين الذين أصبحوا يعني في الابتعاث، فهناك أبناء يكونون في أحد المدارس الأجنبية ففقدوا كثير من اللغة العربية وبالذات كما ذكرت لغة القرآن الكريم. فالآن أصبحت بعض الدول تنمي اللغة العربية في بلادها، وحنا أصبحنا هنا في الدول العربية والخليج نفقد تلك الهوية. فكثير أصبح الآن يجعل أبنائه يتعلمون اللغة العربية من جديد، فأصبح يجد صعوبة في ذلك. فهي مداخلة فعلا للمفهوم الثقافة عند الجيل الشباب الآن. فلو تمكنا نحن ندعم اللغة العربية، والآن أصبح فيها دعم كثير وكثير من بعض الوزارات بعض الجهات وخاصة هنا في الإمارات أصبحوا يدعموا اللغة العربية بقدر كبير. فحبيت أني أعمل مداخلة أن احنا لا نفتقد هذه الهوية وبالذات اللغة العربية. أصبح كثير من الدول الآسيوية والجميع هي تحرص على تعلم هذه اللغة ونحن نفقدها، ومع الأسف أنها هي أساسا موجودة عندنا هنا. فنتمنى إن شاء الله أن نكون دعما لهذا الشيء، وجزاكم الله خير وشاكر إعطاء هذه الفرصة بالمداخلة.
مشكور أخوي على مداخلتك الطيبة، بس حبيت أرد عليك أن الشخص لو كان أساسه قوي مستحيل تضيع هويته. فأغلب اللي نلاحظ مثلا في الشخص لو مثلا ابتعث وقت طويل وما كان في مكان وين يشوف ناس من أهله أو من نفس الثقافة اللي هو ينتمي لها، لو كان أساسه قوي من يوم ما هو صغير ما بيفقد هويته.
Thank you
بس كنت
so
حابة
much.
أقول مداخلة عن اللغة العربية آخر نقطة، إن الواحد لازم ما ينكر إن إحنا نزلت عنا مفهوم اللغة العربية. ليش؟ لأن إحنا كشعب اطلعنا إن اللغة الإنجليزية أفضل وأحسن، صح؟ فإحنا وصلنا مرحلة إن لا، أنا بثقف عيالي في اللغة الإنجليزية أو في اللغات الثانية لأن هذا بيرفعهم، واللغة العربية ما بترفعهم، صح؟ بتنزلهم. فالحين لازم هالمفهوم يرجع، إن اللغة العربية ما بترفع الشخص. فلازم الواحد لازم يتثقف في اللغة العربية، لأن هاي لغة الدين، لغتنا إحنا، عاداتنا، تقاليدنا، فالواحد ما ينساها.
شكرا جزيلا. ونختم الجلسة مع أسما.
مرحبا فيكم. اليوم يعني فاجأتوني صراحة، أخذتوا دورنا وما شاء الله بدعتوا وخليتونا أقزام جنبكم. ما شاء الله عليك شيخة ماجدة، أدرتي الحوار بامتياز، والمواضيع اللي طرحتوها كانت مواضيع قوية وجريئة، واختصرتوا علينا الطريق وانتوا سألتوا وانتوا جاوبتوا، يعني كأنكم دخلتوا في نفوس أمهاتكم وإن ممكن يكسرونكم الأسئلة. طبعا بعد ما دخلت أنا في موضوع الثقافة الثالثة وكنت أدرس دائما، كنت أقول ليش نحن نبغيكم تكونوا صورة منا؟ لا، أنا بالعكس إحنا مبسوطين أنتم بالصورة اللي أنتم وصلتوا لها، لأن بالفعل يعني الحياة تتغير، ما في شيء ثوابت يعني، بس التغيير دائما في محور أساسي هي الأسرة. أنا ما ألومكم أنتم، دائما ألوم الأم والأبو، يعني هم الأسرة اللي اللغة الواحد يستمدها من بيته، اللغة العربية، الدين، العادات، التقاليد. الانفتاح الآخر مش غلط، إني أتكلم إنجليزي مش غلط، بس إن هويتي لما أكون في مكان هي لغتي، لأن دائما يقول عنوان أي مثل ما قال سقراط تكلم أعرفك، يعني لما الواحد يتكلم يعرفك تمين، يعني لما أنا شكلي إماراتي وأتكلم عربي أتكلم إنجليزي يعني بيقولون هذا يمكن فاشينيستا، يعني لابسة مثل ما ساعة كانت عندنا واحدة ترسم رسم أطفال مسويت لها كاركتر خاص فيها على أساس أنها تجذب الناس يعني. بس هي اللغة هويته الإنسان، أمه، أرض، حياته، روحه يعني. بس أنتم مش غلط، بالعكس أنتم صح، تعليمكم صح، أفاقكم أوسع، تسامحكم أكثر، تقبل الآخر عندكم أكثر. الخلطة اللي أنتم عشتوها ما في عندكم فرق بين دين أو عنصر أو لون أو جنسية أو هذا، بالعكس يعني عندكم انفتاح. خلكم على ثقتكم، بالعكس أنتم المستقبل، اللي قاعد يصير هو الصح. الدمار اللي صار باللغة العربية دمار الأهل، الأسرة، مش أنتم بالعكس، أنتم اكتشفتوا الخطأ وحاولتوا تصلحونه، وبالعكس أنتم ماشيين صح. لازم نحن نصعد نفكر في مثلكم أنتم. مع الأسف نحن نبغى نرجعكم مرة، لا، خلكم مثل ما أنتم وكملوا طريقكم، بس في خط رجعة بينكم وبين يعني ما الواحد ما يقطع يقول شعرة معاوية يعني، مثل ما قال الله يرحمه ويغفر له الشيخ زايد: من ليس له ماضي ليس له حاضر. واكيد يعني نحن هاي الربط هو اللي كان، بالعكس انتم المستقبل وانتم الامل، وما شاء الله عليكم كفيتوا واديتوا وعبرتوا على حسب جرأة نحن ما كنا نتكلمها. كفو عليكم يعني. هذا الانسان لما يكون واثق من نفسه يعبر عن نفسه وعن ذاته. كثر الخيركم، مشكورين قبلتوا الدعوة، وانا سعيدة بوجودكم، وانا لازم اوقف لكم احييكم اصلا بالعكس يعني.